The candles trembled in their holders, breathing life into the dim chamber. The air smelled faintly of lavender and melting wax, and the light quivered on the old walls, tracing patterns that seemed to dance with the shadows. Beyond the door, muffled sounds of celebration still echoed faintly. The thud of feet, the faint hum of music, a cheer rising and fading. But she could not hear them, not truly. Ilara only sensed the vibrations beneath her feet, soft ripples that reminded her that the world outside still spun in its noisy orbit. In here, silence reigned, full and complete, the kind that wrapped around her like a cloak. She stood before the mirror, her reflection haloed in candlelight. The white gown shimmered with every breath she took, each thread catching the glow and releasing it in tiny glints of gold. Her fingers brushed the bodice absently, tracing the embroidery she had stitched herself in the quiet nights before the wedding. Every loop of thread was a memory, of waiting, of dreaming, of wondering if love could bloom in silence. Ilara lifted her gaze to the reflection behind her. Arik stood near the doorway, tall and still, watching her as though he feared the moment might shatter if he moved too quickly. He didn't speak. He never needed to, not with her. His silence was not absence but understanding, something fuller, deeper. She had once feared that her deafness would build walls between them, but he had found the windows instead, small ways to let the light in. Her heart beat a little faster as she reached up to remove the veil that clung to her hair. The soft fabric caught on her braid, and he took a hesitant step forward, raising his hand. She saw the question in his eyes before he asked it, a flicker of concern, of gentleness. She nodded, and he came closer, carefully untangling the delicate lace. His fingers brushed her neck for the briefest instant, warm and steady, and she felt the pulse in her throat echo in that touch. She wanted to tell him that the silence didn't scare her anymore, that even though she could not hear the music that had guided the steps of their dance that evening, she had felt it in his movements, in the rhythm of his breath. But words, spoken or signed, seemed too small for that kind of truth, so she let the stillness speak instead. The last of the veil fell away, and she placed it gently over the chair by the window. Outside, lightning flashed across the sky, illuminating the distant hills in silver. She couldn't hear the thunder, but she saw the brief tremor in the candle flames as it rolled somewhere far away. The world was vast, untamed, yet here in this room everything was simple. Two people, one quiet night, and a silence so complete it felt sacred. Arik came to stand beside her. In the mirror, their reflections looked almost unreal, a painting more than a memory. He met her eyes and smiled faintly, that rare, small smile that always reached his eyes before it reached his lips. She lifted her hands to sign a single word, beautiful. He hesitated, then signed it back to her, his gestures slower, careful, shaped by effort and devotion. His hands were rough, calloused from work, yet when he signed they moved with a tenderness that made her throat tighten. She turned toward him fully, her skirt whispering against the floor. The candles caught the edges of his face and the line of his jaw, the faint scar near his temple, the warmth in his expression. It was a face she had memorized long before this night, every shadow and every softness. She lifted one hand and traced the air between them, not quite touching him, but close enough that she could feel the heat of his skin. The gesture was both question and answer, promise and pause. He didn't move to close the distance. He simply watched her, as if her silence had become a kind of music he alone could hear. In that moment, time stretched thin, not a thread to be followed, but a space to be lived in. The candles flickered again, painting the room in shades of gold and amber. Her reflection blurred for a heartbeat, and she realized her eyes had filled with tears, not of sadness but of release. When she blinked them away, he reached up and brushed his thumb beneath her eye, his touch lighter than breath. She didn't need to hear his voice to know what he was saying. His silence was the most eloquent vow she had ever known. For a long while, neither of them moved. The quiet between them thickened until it felt almost visible, a fine thread of breath and heartbeat stretching through the air. Ilara's pulse echoed in her wrists. She could see it there beneath her skin, a faint rhythm she imagined he could feel if he touched her. The last flicker of stormlight slipped through the window, breaking across the floor like a thin blade of silver. The candles swayed in its wake, their small flames bowing but not breaking. She turned slightly, just enough to see his eyes. They were darker in the soft light, the color of the earth after rain, full of things that words couldn't contain. For a moment she thought of signing to him again, of asking if he was all right, if he understood what she was feeling. But something in his expression stopped her. There was no need to ask. He did not speak, yet everything she needed to hear was already there, written in the steadiness of his gaze. Her hands trembled as she reached for the fastening of her gown. It wasn't a gesture of shyness or ceremony. It was something quieter, simpler, a movement born from trust. The fabric was heavy from the day's wear, perfumed faintly with roses and the touch of many hands that had helped her dress that morning. As she loosened each clasp, she felt the weight of them fall away like the hours that had led her here. Arik watched her with a reverence that felt almost fragile. He did not move forward, did not reach for her as if afraid that any motion might break the fragile stillness that held them both. He had always been a man of few words, but in this silence he seemed even more careful, as though language itself would be too loud, too clumsy for the moment they inhabited. When the gown slipped from her shoulders, she gathered it to her chest not from shame but from habit, from the memory of a world where people needed to hide the tender parts of themselves. Then she looked at him again, and in the flickering candlelight she saw not expectation but awe, the kind that comes when someone realizes they've been entrusted with something irreplaceable. He stepped closer, slow enough that she could feel the warmth of him before he reached her. The faint draft that moved between their bodies stirred the candle flames into motion again. One of them sputtered out, smoke curling upward in a small gray ribbon. She watched the smoke drift and thought of sound, the way people said a candle hissed when it died. She could not hear it, but she could imagine the whisper, a small farewell that no one needed to speak aloud. When he lifted his hand, she thought for an instant he might draw her in. Instead, he stopped and touched the small scar behind her ear, the one that marked the day her world had gone quiet. His fingers traced it lightly, not with pity, but with recognition. It was his way of saying he saw her fully, not as broken or incomplete, but as something whole in a different language. Her breath caught, and she felt tears prick the corners of her eyes again. He brushed one away before it could fall, his thumb leaving a faint trail of warmth on her skin. His lips parted as if to speak, then closed again. He had learned early on that she preferred his silence, not because words weren't beautiful, but because they so often failed to reach her. His quiet, however, reached everywhere. She laid her hand against his chest, feeling the slow, even beat of his heart. It was steady and sure, grounding her in a world that no longer needed sound. That rhythm was a kind of music she could understand. He covered her hand with his own, pressing it gently, and she realized that neither of them needed to fill the moment with meaning. It already had enough. The storm outside moved farther away. The lightning faded, leaving only the faint orange of candlelight. Shadows gathered around them, folding the room into a smaller, softer world. She felt his breath near her hair, his forehead resting briefly against hers, and though she could not hear it, she knew he was breathing her name in silence. For the first time that night, she closed her eyes. The world receded, the stone walls, the window, even the soft glow of flame, and all that remained was warmth, heartbeat, and trust. Silence enveloped them once more, not as emptiness, but as promise. In that stillness, words were unnecessary. He did not utter a sound, and she did not need him to. His quiet said everything.